Welcome to Poplar Creek Public Library's Zoom program, a talk with author Adam P. Schmitt. My name is Hannah Sloan, and I am the Teen Services Coordinator here at the Poplar Creek Public Library. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce the author of Speechless, Adam P. Schmitt. Adam has been a middle school teacher for more than 15 years and is one of Illinois' local authors. Welcome, Adam.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And I'm glad we got to do this. I know that the past years caused a little rift in everyone's schedule. So I'm glad that this worked. Yes, I'm the author of Speechless. This is my first novel I've ever written. And I'm just still kind of I'm enjoying the journey, I think is the best way to say it. I'm enjoying every bit of it, everyone I get to meet. Every time I get to talk to a group of kids that I wouldn't have had that before, and getting to meet other authors, it's really just been an amazing journey. So I always approach these as an open book, that if I can help any writer or anybody who wants to try something new and maybe has what's known in the writer industry as imposter syndrome of, do I belong here? That I'm hoping I can help with that, as somebody who didn't study writing, had never written a book, but just really worked hard at it and met the right people. I was very lucky, but I definitely am grateful for every bit of this.
Okay. I have several questions here from Mrs. Jones's class, so I'm going to start off with a couple of those, if you don't mind.
Sure.
All right, the first question, do you relate more to Jimmy or Patrick?
Oh, good question. Absolutely, Jimmy. I will say, one of the things that I've learned, I don't know who wrote it, who said this quote, but it's a quote that once I heard it, I thought, wow, that's spot on. And that is, if you write an autobiography, that people will read it under the lens of, where's the fiction in this? And if you write fiction, people read it under the lens, where's the autobiography in this? So I definitely relate more to Jimmy. He is not me, but there's definitely pieces of him in there. And then Patrick, I didn't have a Patrick in my life. I had several Patricks in my life. There wasn't one person I said, I'm going to define this person on the page. But I definitely related more to Jimmy. And I would say even every character has a little bit of me in them. And that's not a compliment. That's just being very vulnerable and saying, I've just taken looks at things I wish I'd done differently, or things I wish I were stronger at. And I kind of turned those into characters. And in Jimmy's case, he was somebody who was just insecure enough that he couldn't find his own voice, and he needed a big push to find his own voice. So I definitely relate in that sense.
Okay. Have you ever known someone like Patrick?
So yes. So I want to be clear, there is not a Pat, and people have asked me that. So who was the Pat? Did you have a? No, I did not have a cousin like that. There's a couple of influences on Patrick's character. I've had a relative older than me, different generation, who I think was in that realm of, was not always welcome and tended to kind of make things difficult. But once they were gone, it was like we all of a sudden saw the good in this person that we never talked about before. So that really stuck with me. And then if you don't know, I'm living the middle school life. So I'm in my 21st year as a middle school educator. So I've had lots of Patricks over the years. And all I'm saying is I've had lots of kids that are saying something, but not necessarily through words, through their actions. And oftentimes they're saying, I need help. I don't even know what that is. I just know something is not right. And it takes the right person to make that connection and hear what their needs are. And that was something that, again, there's not one student I've had in the past that like, oh yeah, this is the student. I've taught many grade levels and different subjects, and every teacher you ask has a Patrick. Every teacher has one or multiple. And one of the best things about this journey for me is getting to talk to random people. It really is one of the best things. And more than once, I've been at an event and I've had a teacher approach me and say, I had a kid this year I couldn't stand. And after reading Speechless, I approached them differently. And now we're totally connected. We totally get each other, and they're my favorite student. Reading Speechless helped me put on a different hat and say, I'm just here to listen. What do you have to say? Those are some of my favorite memories of Speechless. But overall, there's bits and pieces of a lot of people here.
Okay. Who inspired you to make such a caring character as Sophia?
So Sophia's my favorite character.
I think Sophia is a lot of people's favorite character.
I've always wanted to do a silent character. So that was big for me. And I think about films and books that I've liked. I love the idea of a silent character. Thinking of Ken Casey's One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. It's Chief is the main character, but we don't hear him speak. And shows like Breaking Bad has multiple silent characters that are incredibly powerful on the screen. And I love that idea. So I knew I wanted to have a character that had to speak through action, not words. And I did an interview when Speechless first came out, and the person interviewing me said, there's kind of a formula to middle grade fiction. And that is, there's three characters typically. One's the heart, one's the head, one's the gut. And she said, Sophia is the heart. And when she said that, it really made sense to me. Like, and that was her role. Her role was the heart. Her role was the absolute heart that looked at everything through caring eyes and had her own experiences that made her look at Patrick differently than everyone else had. And I love the irony that I'm a big fan of irony in life. I loved that the only person who ever listened to Patrick was his deaf sister. She was the only one who ever listened to him. So that was important for me to have that relationship. And she was always, I mentioned once, and she said, oh, she's like a cat. And that's how I created her. Like, she was just kind of always in the corner, quietly walking back and forth. You didn't notice her, but she took in everything. She knew everything that was going on.
Very good. Who is your favorite character in the book?
So it is Sophia. A lot of the reasons I said, because she's the most powerful character. She's the smallest. She's physically the smallest, physically the weakest, and she's ignored by most, but she silenced an entire room. And no one else has that power. So because she has that energy about her, that she is not going to intervene often, but when she does, she gets everyone's attention. And I wanted a character like that who was not, Patrick was the one who everyone heard, everyone saw, but at the end of the day, Sophia was the one that got everyone's attention.
Okay. Which Patrick story was your favorite to write?
Favorite to write? Probably the band room story. So there's a chapter about him being in band, and I was in band in high school, and I enjoyed categorizing the groups as I remembered them in band, because to an outsider, you're in band, you're a band geek. But when you're in band, there are very defined factions. I think anybody who's in high school band will tell you, oh yes, there absolutely are very defined factions and roles. So I liked creating that scene, and I liked the idea of the build up, and that's where we didn't see Patrick lash out. That was, to me, that was where we started to see a different side, where we saw him internalize things differently and respond differently. The way I designed the chapters was every one of them was a red flag, and the red flags just became bigger and bigger as the chapters increased. But in that scene, I liked that depiction of what band is like for a lot of kids. That it is this microcosm of different groups and different people, and it's so high energy. And that's what I remember about it when I was in band. I did percussion, and I remember I really loved playing percussion. But for some reason, I remember when we would get ready to perform, I remember that more than performance. I just remember the room that 30 minutes before, everyone getting dressed and the energy, and you could see the different personalities coming out. And I've had several people who said I was in band, and that's the most accurate depiction of the band room I've ever seen. So that means a lot to me when readers say I represent the group appropriately.
Was Uncle Mike supposed to be like the grandpa with his anger?
Not kind of. So I have a lot of adult undertones in there that I don't just overtly say. So was he like Grandpa in his anger? Kind of. He wasn't supposed to be just like Grandpa, but I'm a big believer that whenever you have growing up, good or bad, it's your normal. And there's a comfort in that. Even if it's bad, there's a comfort in that. And I think as you get older, I think a lot of people as adults, and myself included, there's times you look at situations and think, why am I in that situation? It seems normal to me. And you think about like, well, how did this person end up with this person? And you always hear that, well, you tend to marry somebody who represents kind of one of your parents. So in that sense, yeah, the daughter found someone who had anger. She knew what that was like, and she married him. I also wanted to have Mike it was important there was no villain. So I wanted to show Uncle Mike wasn't a bad guy. He wasn't malicious. He wasn't intentional. He didn't have a skill set to work with Patrick. He didn't have a skill set to adapt. He knew I was raised this way, and that's the way it's going to be. And I was raised with discipline, and that's the way it's going to be. And because he didn't adapt, he was not fit for his own son or his daughter, because they both required the parents to kind of switch gears, and neither of them did. They knew what they knew, and that was it. And that's what I wanted to show. And I think in my adult life, like as a teacher, we see that. I've got two boys of my own that I thought about. So I've coached a lot of sports, so on a little tangent. And I've coached football for 14 years. And one of the things I've seen is when I coach football and I work with coaches, they always lean on what they were taught in high school. And that's the way. That's it. That's the way. And I always coached where, okay, this didn't work. We're done with it. This offense isn't working with the kids. We're done with it. And I thought of it in that sense, that as adults, a lot of us, whatever we were raised with, that's the way, that's the norm. And you've got to get in line because it worked for me. And that's who Uncle Mike was. He knew how he was raised, and he drank. I was very careful to not say he was an alcoholic. I still didn't paint him that way. But I think very much like Grandpa, he self-medicated when he was frustrated and when he didn't know what to do. And I think that's common as well. So it's also, I was careful to remember, it was all told through Jimmy's perspective. So he only knew what he saw. He didn't know backstories. As we saw when the mom was talking to him, there were things in the family you just don't talk about. So, short answer, Uncle Mike has a lot of similarities, which is probably why the sister migrated to him years ago in their backstory. And there was some history repeating itself a little bit.
Okay. What made you want to write about kids?
I love this age group. The reason I really like this middle grade, particularly upper middle grade, is I feel like I think it's getting better. I feel like it's kind of lost. I think that there's a lot of opportunity for grade 3 and 4 readers. And I think there's a lot of opportunity for grade 5, 6 readers. And then I feel like then it just jumps to YA. And simply, how many protagonists are 13 years old? And I think there aren't many. And I know I'm like most authors, I don't read as much as I want to. I got my stack of books. But for middle grade, I think there's a jump for some of these. And one of the things I know, like when I talk to my agent, is if you look at, okay, what are the best-selling middle grade books? That a lot of times they're geared a little younger. But then if you walk into a 7th or 8th grade language arts room, they're reading Lord of the Flies or To Kill a Mockingbird, things that are very mature adult themes, different concepts, and lots to unpack. So I'm very drawn to represent that age group that I want to give a voice to. And I'm not saying there isn't a voice. I'm not saying that at all. But I do think there's a jump. Kids typically read up. They typically read about characters who are a little older. And I think one of the reasons a lot of 7th and 8th graders, 12, 13-year-olds read YA is I'm not sure how many protagonists there are who are in that age group. So that's I really want to give them companions. I don't want to say guides, but companions to know like that they're not alone in navigating the awkwardness of those super awkward years. Super awkward. You're never going to meet someone who says, "Yeah, I had it figured out at 13." Yeah, you're never going to find that. Everyone was awkward at that age.
Yeah, that's true. What other books have you written?
This was my first book. This is my first manuscript, and I'm working on a couple of manuscripts since then. Like I said, I'm a full-time educator. I'm an instructional coach for middle school, so I have to navigate that. And my wife and I have 2 boys. I have 2 middle schoolers, so I have a deal with myself that I'll never miss something. I never miss a game. I never miss an event. So that's what's kind of nice about where I'm at. I try to remind myself I have the best of both worlds. So I write on breaks, like my spring break. I'll write in summer and I'll write on weekends, and that can be a lot. But it's also nice that I have my day job, I have my family. I can kind of pace it.
So is there something on the horizon then?
So this is what's tough for me. Yes. But then there's the business side of publishing. So I am not the one who determines if a book is going to be coming out. But I have a couple of manuscripts that I'm working on and going back and forth and revising. So nothing in the books yet, but I'm hopeful by the end of this year, I'm hopeful to have something.
Okay, good. Okay. I'm going to get to one of my questions, okay?
Sure.
I know there are only a few books that I've read that made me want to thank the author for writing the book. And this is actually one of them, because I called you or messaged you, emailed you and said, hey, I want to talk to you and say thank you. So what books have spoken to you so much that you wanted to do something about it?
I really like more adults. So in my reader role, just pure reader, I kind of jumped from picture books to adult classics. So I still, my favorite book, I love Maurice Sendak, Where the Wild Things Are. I think a lot of people love that book, but when I saw how he wrote that, and I loved, I couldn't unsee once I saw what the author was doing. I couldn't unsee it, how the frames of the pictures matched his imagination. And I know this sounds kind of dark, but hearing him talk about the monsters had yellow eyes because he grew up in a house of alcoholism. And so I'm drawn to those soft exposures into reality for kids. I really think those are important. And then a couple of books that I read years ago. I mentioned One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. That was just a brilliant book. One I remember in college that was I've never read something like this, was Things Fall Apart by Schmitt of Speechless. And that was one I've never read a book where I was so immersed in a culture that I had zero background on, and was spent the book wondering, well, who's wrong here? And then just seeing the big picture and the internal conflict of the character. I just thought that was such an important book, and I love, and I'm going to say Marvel does a nice job of this with their movies. They do a great job of creating antagonists that in their heart believe they're doing the right thing. And so I'm kind of drawn to books like that. And then in that book, the colonists and the religious groups coming in who were really trying to help what they thought was the right thing. And then from the main character's perspective was completely different. But and then one more I remember a picture book called My Life with the Wave, and it was a picture book version of an adult poem. And I just, in class, I would use that as an example for metaphors and similes. And again, I love those picture books that on the surface are beautiful and great stories, and then when you break them apart, say, like, okay, and there's some reality, there's a little bit of darkness, there's two ways I can look at this. So anytime I can, my thing is, anytime I read something and think I could have never done this, I'm impressed. And I think the last one I read was Bone Gap. And one of the great things, I got to meet Laura Ruby a couple times. But that's one I look at and think, this, if you told me the premise of this, I would say, I don't think that's going to work. And it does. And that's what I think is brilliant writing. Anytime you describe it and think, that should not work, but it does. I don't know how, but it does. To me, that's great writing.
Okay. You touched on this before. The start of your book, you do a 12-point lessons. Why didn't you just want to call it a table of contents? Why did you do it the way you did?
So that started that way, and that stayed throughout. I did not want to call it a table of contents because I wanted it to be a literal list for any kid who has never been to a funeral to see it as a list, not as a table of contents, but as a guide. Be prepared, because these are things you are probably going to experience in the next 3 hours. So that was very important to me that the table of contents was not called that, but it was his list of he had to grow up real fast and things that he didn't expect and things that happened. And it was very important to me. I think about a lot of kids who are very lucky, who have a mentor, who have an adult, a teacher, a librarian, a coach, a parent. And there's a lot of kids that don't have that. And I think that's something that's done a lot, and that's fantastic when it happens in life, but I wanted him alone. I wanted him and that was one of my family dynamics is one of the themes that I talk about. I wanted everyone else to be in their own world and everyone else, like, I got to take care of myself right now. And the kids are kind of left. So and that's why all the side characters were all off, because that's kind of how it is in an uncomfortable environment. Adults don't know how to act either. So I really wanted to show, like, the adults don't have the social skills. No one's got the answers here. And it's kind of a Darwinism. It's survival of the fittest here. And he was the runt of the litter. And he was the one kind of always brushed aside, and in the wake scenes and always pushed aside because everyone else was kind of taking care of themselves.
Okay. What was the high point and the low point of writing the book?
I would say, that's a good question. So probably the same point, I would say. And after I had sold it to Candlewick, so this was something I learned as a writer, and it's different for everybody, but my agent called and said we sold it, and I was really ecstatic. And then when I talked to my editor at Candlewick, she said, "So you're ready to work on this?" And I just thought, like, all right, we sold it, and then that was that. And it's actually set up where I work on it for 9 months with my editor, which I think is fairly common. Now it could have been because I was a new author, but I know, like people have said, so when does your next book come out? If I sold my next book tomorrow, it wouldn't come out until Thanksgiving of next year. And that's pretty standard in the industry. It takes a long time. So during that time, one of the scenes that I really liked, my editor said, "I just don't like it. This scene makes me uncomfortable. We have to change it." And it was when Sophia's teachers came into the wake. So the original scene was more hostile, and it had another character that I really liked, another like guest at the wake that I really liked, and I didn't want to lose her. And I spent more time on those 6 pages than anything else in the book. I spent probably 2 weeks on those 6 pages, and then it is my favorite scene now. It is completely my favorite scenes. That was kind of the low point of I don't know what to do. I truly didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to rewrite it. I didn't want to lose this character. I ended up that saying is true. You kill your darlings. So I ended up getting rid of that character and rewriting it, and it's my favorite scene in the book. So now I think that's the high point because that is my favorite scene in the book.
Okay. How often do you actually hear from your readers?
Here and there. So not a lot of times kids, they don't typically reach out. Like I don't get a lot of just random emails from kids, but I would hear more from teachers and librarians on Twitter. So I probably don't go a week without somebody tagging me. And I'm not a big social media person. Like I honestly have Twitter just because I have to. But that is the nice thing. I get tagged. So like I had 2 schools last week tag me that they did March Madness Final Four, and one school said I won their March Madness, and another one let me know I'm in the finals, and so things like that. It's nice. Or I definitely hear more from teachers than I do students, but sometimes I'll get an email from a reader, which is really nice too.
Okay. All right. How do your students actually react when they learn that you are an author or when they've read your book?
It's funny because it's kind of like my own kids. My kids know me as Dad, so it's a big deal. And then my students know me as Mr. Schmitt. So they're there's no Hollywood, like someone sneaking a picture of me, or there's nothing like that. They know me as Mr. Schmitt. This year, probably a little more, and this year I had a little more clout being on the Rebecca Caudle list. So when the incoming sixth graders came in, there was a little more like, what, really? No way that he's here. And earlier in the year, I talked to one of the honors English classes in sixth grade, and when the teacher introduced me, I remember, she said, so we're gonna have one of the Rebecca Caudle authors here. He actually works at the school, and he's down the hall, so he's going to come talk to you. And like, as I was on the Zoom call, I could see parents' heads coming in from the side, like, wait, is that for real? That he really does? And so this year's been a little bit more, but when the book came out, the kids were awesome, and they were super happy for me. But I'm Mr. Schmitt to them. I'm the man in the library, and I'm the guy who pops into classes. And some kids, it is fun though. They'll walk by and say, "Oh, I loved your book. Your book was so good. My family read your book," and that's really cool for me. But they're all very sweet about it. But I'm also very cognizant that at school I have a job there, and one teacher was talking about my book, and she said, "Hey, I need a copy of your book. I'm going to talk about it today." I'm like, "I don't have it." And she's like, "How do you not have a copy of your own book in your office?" And but that's how I am at school. At school, I have my role, and I really keep a defined line between my writer and my educator. So that's probably some on me, but yeah, I'm Mr. Schmitt to them. It's I'm just a teacher.
Why did you make the moms twins?
I really like the idea of twins. I'm not a twin, but I'm fascinated with the connection twins have, and it was very important to me that the moms were going to be the mom's number one priority was always each other. And that's something in my adult life that I've seen when many times when two people get married or families change, add someone, then those relationships change, and sometimes they don't, and sometimes there's a power struggle. So I wanted to have that dynamic where the sisters were kind of locked with each other, and they were always each other's priority. And as a result, they have kids that were not the priority. And I kind of took from times in my adult life where I've seen people make their careers their priority and not their kids, or a different family member priority, or something like that. But so I wanted to show that the parents weren't just completely negligent. I really wanted to show that parents never learned the skill sets to put their kids first. And that was really important. There's no bad guy in this. There's no villain in this that I want to see fall. Everyone brings in their own stuff. And I think things like, and I've mentioned a couple times, a wake is like a wedding. Those are the two events that they bring everybody together. And a lot of times you see those dynamics, and you see things kind of go not in a great way, because a lot of skeletons come out of the closet with those things.
Yeah, I remember my first funeral, and I had to attend, and my thoughts about the funeral and everything going on back then were exactly like Jimmy's in the book. And how did you make Jimmy so realistic? Is he based off of just a lot of people that you know, or just one person, or?
So I did base a lot on me. I had a time, so this is where I got the idea for Speechless, where I had this time, unfortunately, I went to several services in a really short time frame, and they were all very different. and they were structured differently, and the emotions were different, and the cause of death was different, and one of them was for somebody who essentially died of old age, which that was the one you go to, you're sad, it's good to see people, it kind of follows the formula, and the rest were not. And I just kept finding myself as an adult not knowing how to navigate some of those. And unfortunately, more than one was for a kid, former student. Two of them were for former students. And then one was for someone who took their life. And each one of those brought a lot of confusion to me. And I wanted to show how one of them in particular, I remember, was I had students, and they were twins, and their mom passed, and I had them in class. And I went to the service. I just remember seeing all my students there, seeing this room of 13-year-olds. And I remember I had my friend go with me. She was the math teacher. And I said, I don't want to go this alone. And she said, I don't want to go alone either. So we went together. And then we saw all our kids there and thought, if we didn't want to be here alone, we wanted to be there, but we were uncomfortable. We couldn't imagine all these kids the first time experiencing this. So that's where a lot of it came from, of my own experiences, where I didn't know what to do, what to say, who to talk to, when to leave, what to say while I'm in line, why are people acting a certain way, should I laugh? And they were all very different. They were all, I went to one for a former student, and the parents had a party, like they had music and food, and they said this is what our son would have wanted, and I had to respect that. 100% had to respect that. But it still was like, no, I came in ready to be sad. I came in ready to grieve that this kid died, and you want me to have fun. And there's so many times I think that's what happens at a funeral, and funerals end, and then there's a party after, or an Irish wake, or something. They're all very different, and it is a matter of, I have to walk in the room, I have to read the room, I have to figure out what the vibe is here, and then I have my own emotions I'm dealing with, and it's just so much coming at you at once, and I wanted a character who just was overloaded.
Did you always want to be a writer, or was this something that just kind of hit you? I need to write this book.
I've always wanted to. This did hit me. I've always wanted to be a writer. I didn't write anything for at least 10 years when I started teaching, and teaching is what influenced me more than anything to be a writer, honestly, just because I really enjoyed being creative, making my lessons for kids and telling stories. And I always made up stories in my lessons that I could get them to think a certain way or see history a certain way. And that really helped me translate into writing.
I know you've gotten some responses from the book. So what was the best and the worst of them?
All right, so one, I will not look at Goodreads. I have no idea what's said about me. I looked at the first couple, and it's just being a human. I can see 10 great reviews, and the one that says meh, that's it. That's all I think about. So I don't look at Goodreads. One of the best I've ever had. I can definitely tell you the worst. The best I ever had was at the Illinois Reads session. So this was 2 years ago. They had the Illinois Reads Fest, and they had Illinois Reads authors there, and this teacher grabbed me and started crying and said, I had a kid I couldn't connect with, and then I read your book, and I kind of mentioned this earlier, and she was one I really stood out to me and said, now she's my favorite. Like, oh, that's so nice. Gave her a hug. It was so nice. And Trench said, and she's right over here. I brought her with me today. And this was a Saturday. So she was so close with the student now. She brought the student to this event to meet me. And when the student met me, and because she clearly knew, she just started crying when she saw me, and I signed the book for her. And that beat any review I've ever had. Worst, so, and this is where I don't look at Goodreads. So I learned when books come out, that Amazon does not allow reviews until publication day. So there were, there's really like 8 months of the advanced reader copies out there, and it was already reviewed in several publications, and it had received a couple of star reviews. And so my book birthday, I was really excited. I'm going to see a review on Amazon. So I'm just like taking everything in. So this person on Amazon wrote this multi-paragraph and titled it "Warning for Parents," and just went into great detail that I wrote a book that is a recipe to turn children into psychopaths. I have no business working with kids. It was just personal. It was just all personal. And I think what bothered me was that was my book birthday. So it wasn't like, oh, you're ruining my book birthday. It was like, okay, you read this and sat on it until the book came out. You knew when the book was coming out and you sat on this. Like, you have that much anger in you for this book. And it was so hostile that future reviewers like tried to debunk her because they're like, what are you talking about? This is exactly how middle school kids talk. But that was a lesson for me that, there's haters in the world. And that's why I don't look at Goodreads. Thank you to everyone who has given me a nice review. But that's one thing I've learned in our social media age. There's a lot of people that want to be incentivized and famous for tearing people apart. And they make a living or are trying to become famous for tearing people apart. And that's just the world we live in. But like I said, so my next like 25 reviews on Amazon were incredible, but it was like, oh, that's the first one. I couldn't believe that was, and so then I had this panic of like, oh my God, did I really create this horrible book that is going to negatively influence kids? And that was my worst nightmare. And it's in the world. I can't take it back. And there's so much anxiety. Like once it goes in the world, it's so much anxiety with that. So that was a lesson, The world's got those people in it.
I can't even imagine. Boy, did you write the ending first, or did you wait to see what Jimmy would say when you got there?
I waited to see. I didn't know what he would say. I just knew there would be a speech. I didn't know what he would say until we got there. And I didn't write it sequentially either. I pretty much, every time I sat down, I tried to write a scene, whether that be the wake scene or a flashback scene. And then once I had those, some got tossed, some got added, some were reinforced. Some characters came, some characters went. So, but no, I did not know what he was going to say until I got there.
How long did it take you to write Speechless, from the very first pen to paper or finger to typewriter or whatever it is to the finishing publication of everything? So
this is my answer to anyone who wants to be a writer. It took me 4 months to write it. It took me 4 years to revise it. And that's I say it every time I talk to a group of kids. If you want to write a book, it's actually easy. If you want to revise a book, that's where the work is, and that's what makes you a writer. Is being able to revise it. That is where the work is. You have to be open for criticism. You have to be open for feedback. You have to be willing to change it. I'm still learning that lesson. Believe me, it is not easy. But that's pretty much it. I started writing it in February, and I finished it that summer. Draft 1 was a little over 29,000 words, and the copy that's in people's hands now is about 58,000 words. So, and that's having thrown a lot out too. So that's the level of revising that it takes.
Okay. I'm going to end on a fun note here. Your sense of humor makes the book fun, even though it's a sad topic to talk about. What's the most amusing thing that's ever happened to you?
Yeah, most amusing ever, like at a wake or just
anything that's ever happened to you, the most amusing thing that's ever happened to you.
Oh, that's a big one. Oh man. I don't know that I could pin anything down. I remember I'm a middle school teacher, so I've seen a lot. I've definitely seen a lot. I would say all right. So I'll say one that's kind of based on real stories. I don't know if this is the most amusing that's ever happened, but the scene in the book where he goes to the farm is pretty close to when we took our kids to a relative's farm over the summer. That we did not realize we were having pig, and we did not realize that that pig was slaughtered that morning, and we did not realize what went into that. And so that, that was dinner on the farm. It was delicious. It was very and very kind to them, but it was different for us and suburban folk, and so we were definitely learning a lot. So things like that were contributed to it, and these are family I love and love seeing, and it was an experience. But that was one I took from it. But, what if, because we said, like, I've never had dinner where I saw the animal that morning and then ate it that night. I have not experienced that, and so that made it to the book too. And my cousins have read it and they approve.
Okay. Thank you so much, Adam. And thank you all for coming to this event. We hope to see you all at future library events. Don't forget to fill out our survey form. It will be emailed to those who signed up on our website and will be distributed by Mrs. Jones to those who attended with her class link. Have a wonderful day.
Thanks, everyone.